Apple just announced a few new computers, including a revamped iMac and MacBook Pros, but what made the most ripples on the computing waters were the new, really mini, little, tiny, almost as small as an Apple TV box, M4 Mac Minis. But is the M4 Mac Mini good for music production? And if so, which one? Can it handle Atmos? Should you go for it or should you wait? Can you afford it? Greetings, I am Pat and I work closely with major and indie labels and artists, helping them reach more fans and make more money, and today we'll take a stab at answering all these questions. We'll give you my recommendations as well, but as always, take everything with a grain of salt. We all have different needs and wants and different workflows. The new M4 Mac Mini. We'll leave the environmental milestones, as this is the first carbon-neutral Mac released, and the Apple Intelligence stuff, and focus on what we care about the most: music production and immersive audio, Dolby Atmos, and more, of course. What we need are three things: a strong processor, enough RAM, and a large enough SSD. Okay, let's look at our processor options. Well, folks, the chip's CPU's performance cores is the name of the game for music production. The more performance cores a Mac has, the better. That's what runs plugins, virtual instruments, and all that jazz. The E-cores, or efficiency cores, can also help, but certain DAWs cannot take advantage of them that much. But we'll get back to this later. We first need to choose between the standard M4 or the M4 Pro. The standard M4 for the Mac Mini has 4 performance cores and 6 efficiency cores. The M4 Pro has 8 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. Essentially double the performance core performance for not that much extra moolah. But which DAWs are taking advantage of the additional efficiency cores and which have an issue? Are you ready to have your mind blown? An Apple product, Logic Pro, unfortunately does not take advantage of the additional efficiency cores. Studio One, Ableton Live, and yes, Pro Tools as well do not. So, if your setup includes these DAWs, the standard M4 might not be the best choice. By the way, the DAWs that are able to utilize the efficiency cores are Reaper, Cubase, and FL Studio. Users rejoice! Let's now move to memory. Lucky for us, the new Minis all come now with 16 gigabytes of RAM, which should be plenty for most workflows, unless you are using an exorbitant amount of virtual instruments, so then I would opt for 24 or 48 gigs of RAM. What about hard drives? Learned this the hard way time and time again. Like very recently, when my friends over at Rhino Records sent me the multitracks to do an Atmos mix of an iconic record that were iconic in size. More than 1 terabyte. Which means that I had to be working on a different drive till the project got down to a level the main studio computer could handle. The Mac Studio at the studio is an M1 Max with 64 gigs of RAM, but only a 1 terabyte drive. Should have gotten the 2 terabyte drive, and you know, with the new Macs, you cannot upgrade after the fact, but oh well. We digress a bit, but why didn't you work off of an external SSD, you ask? Well, let me tell you. And There, I'll tie it to this video's subject too. The new entry-level M4 Mac Minis, and you can, of course, upgrade all these when you order, but remember, not after. Have a decent amount of RAM, but a very small SSD. I guess if you need this as a media computer, you'll be good with the 256 gigs. But to answer your hypothetical question, yes, you can get an external SSD, but even with Thunderbolt 4 at 40 gigabits per second, it nowhere near matches the speed of the internal drive, at least not when considering current or almost current generation computers and drives. To give you an example, my M1 Max Mac Studio's internal speed is close to 8,000 megabytes per second, while a popular external SSD like the Samsung T7 gets to about 800 megabytes per second. But some externals say up to 40 gigabps in their marketing material pad. Well, read closer. Don't get fooled. They do not reach advertised speeds, at least on the Mac. It has something to do with the implementation of Thunderbolt 4 on Macs that makes them single and not double wire, so the drives cannot use all that speed. The fastest available would be to get a Thunderbolt 4 enclosure, and not all those are created equal to, and install an SSD drive card inside that enclosure. After having wasted my money on a Samsung T9, product claim of 2000 megabytes per second, which is a great drive and much faster than the T7, product claim of 1050 megabytes per second, but not on a Mac, due to that Thunderbolt single versus dual wire thing, I went that route. Here's some speed tests for you to look at while I tell you that even that caps at less than 4000 megabytes per second, which is amazing, but is still half the speed of my Mac Studio's internal SSD. Moral of the story, get more hard drive space if you need it. Now, for Atmos, we just need a bit more of everything. More performance cores because we are running an audio system where we need more than stereo processing. Way more, as a matter of fact, a 7.1.4 instance of Pro Q3 at linear phase needs much more juice than a 2.0 stereo instance. Now imagine the CPU intensive effect called reverb. The calculations a 7.1.4 reverb needs to make in almost real time is bonkers. It needs the processing juice. See where I'm going with this? So, real world? For music production and Atmos, I would suggest to not get an entry-level M4, but get an M3 Pro, since that one extra performance core the M3 Pro has will make a difference. Will the studio be upgrading? Right now we are using a Mac Studio M1 Max with 64 gigs of RAM and a 1 terabyte drive. Processor and RAM we're all set, have not had any issues at all, but hey, getting some extra speed when exporting audio and video or calculating loudness in the renderer is always nice to have. But not now. We'll be waiting for the new Mac Studio, and even then we'll think about it. So which one should you be going for? If you run a professional studio or need the extra juice in your productions, I would not go for any of these new Mac Minis right now. I would wait for the new Mac Studios. It did not get refreshed this time, so it most likely will sometime in 2025. That lineup will also include more options like the M4 Max and the M4 Ultra, though this type of power is for computing that requires it, like 3D rendering or extreme video, and not necessarily needed for a music production workflow, even in Atmos. Note that both the M4 Max and the M4 Ultra are not available as an option for the Mac Mini. But when you realize that the Ultra is a couple of M4 Maxes living together in harmony and you feel large and trigger happy, you can happily contribute to Tim Cook's new Ferrari. If you are a bedroom producer or hobbyist in need of a good, solid machine to do work on, I would avoid the M4 unless only that's what you can afford, in which case you can't get any better, and go for the sweet spot, which is the M4 Pro with 12-core CPU, 8 performance cores, and 4 efficiency cores, 24 gigs of RAM, and a 512 gigabytes hard drive, which you can enhance with an external SSD, which clocks at 1,399 Washingtons and a bit more than that in euros or other currencies. If you need the extra RAM, it'll cost you plus 400 USD to get to 48 gigs and plus 200 to get to the 1 terabyte drive. You could also add another couple of CPU performance cores for an extra couple of hundred, which would take you up to $2,199, which is not too shabby, but considerably more than the $1,399 and way more than the entry-level M4 at $599. But to each their own. Now that you've planned for all that extra power, you'll need powerful plugins. And here are 10 of my favorites for mixing in Atmos.